Welcome back to Era 3 of APUS History, and as a reminder, this unit covers the time period 1754 to 1800, and in this video we're going to begin by talking about the philosophical foundations of the American Revolution. The main objective in this video is to be able to explain how and why colonial attitudes about government and the individual changed in the years leading up to the American Revolution. The development of these ideas and the debates about them helped shape American society, and especially the development of a national identity. Now, we talked about this in the last unit, but one of the biggest influences on the development of the situation that led to the American Revolution was the philosophical movement known as the Enlightenment. Nearly all of the colonies were in agreement with the idea that Britain was slowly increasing its legislative tyranny over the colonies, and that something needed to be done. The Stamp Act Congress was one example of the colonists petitioning Parliament as loyal subjects to the Crown. They viewed themselves as British and wanted what was due to them as British citizens. But Parliament didn't listen in this case, though the law was repealed, but that was because of pressure from merchants in London who had been profiting from trade with America. And when that trade vanished, they demanded relief. This idea that they could petition their government was one of the many ideas that colonial leaders developed from Enlightenment thinkers. In addition, the rise of a form of theology known as deism, which grew out of the Enlightenment, was also influenced many of these colonial leaders. Deists rejected the idea of revelation as a source of divine knowledge, and instead focused only on that which could be established by reason and observation of the natural world. They believed that there was a supreme creator of the universe, and that he gave humans the ability to reason. They also believed that he revealed himself through nature, but would not intervene in the world that he created. Men were to use the reasoning he gave them to solve the world's problems. So now we will look at some of the prominent writers of the Enlightenment, whose work had a tremendous impact on the colonial leaders. And we will begin with John Locke. His most well-known work, Two Treatises on Government, argued that a legitimate government could only exist with the consent of the governed. In other words, the power to govern is in the hands of the people, not the hands of the monarch. If a government exists, whatever form it may take, it is because the people wished for it and allow it to exist. Another key idea put forth by Locke was the idea that human beings, just by virtue of existing, are endowed with natural rights. These rights are not granted to the people by a king or even an elected government, but rather by the creator of the world. Since those rights are not granted by the government could not take them away. And for Locke, those main natural rights were life, liberty, and property. Locke also argued that a people's liberty comes through self-rule through their elected representatives, which stands in stark contrast to the idea of a hereditary ruling class as existed in Britain. Another notable Enlightenment thinker who influenced the colonial leaders was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Two of his notable works included his Discourse on Inequality, which questions how the divide amongst social classes fit into the ideas about natural law, as well as his work titled The Social Contract. That work identified the concept of the social will, which is the will of the whole population, as opposed to the will of the government, which is separate, but must abide by the boundaries set in place by the people. If it does not, then it is the goal of the people to abolish such a government and to begin again. Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, was a noted Scottish economist and philosopher who helped develop the idea of a political economy. Smith laid the foundations for classical free market economic theory. In this and other works, he developed the concept of division of labor, which is separation of tasks so that individuals can specialize in what they are best at. He foresaw the essence of industrialism by determining that this division of labor would represent a substantial increase in productivity, and likely even an increase in the quality of production. Though he is considered the father of modern economics, his ideas formed the basis for economic policies that would be pursued by the government. Americans during this time saw themselves as a people blessed with liberty, and any threat to that liberty was a threat to their very lives. And yet, even as colonial leaders were participating in the Continental Congress in 1774 to address colonial grievances about the threats to their liberties presented by the Intolerable Acts, they still offered a toast to King George III. They still wanted to be British citizens and were not supportive of a revolution. Such a thing wasn't even being discussed. And this was true not only for members of Congress, but also for most of the colonial population. Even by 1776, only about a third of Americans would have truly been considered rebels. And there was still a significant number of loyalists, estimated to be around 20% of the total population living in the colonies in 1776, many of them in the southern portions of the colonies. So how did things change? One of the most significant factors was the publication of a pamphlet in early 1776 called Common Sense by Thomas Paine. In it, Paine put forth a very simple argument for independence from Britain. He used examples from the Bible to show the folly of monarchy. Common Sense also heavily espoused Enlightenment thought, and this was a big deal because while it was expected that the leaders in the Continental Congress, the elites of colonial society, would have read works by Locke and Rousseau and others, the common people likely would not have. But Thomas Paine was able to bring these ideas to the masses and ignite a fire that carried many through the war itself. Simply put, he argued that it went against natural law for a continent to be ruled by an island, for a satellite to be larger than its primary planet. And so was sentiments among the masses shifting from being British citizens to being independent Americans. In June of 1776, the Second Continental Congress saw the introduction of a resolution by Richard Henry Lee of Virginia, quote, that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. Unquote. Since not all of the colony's representatives were prepared or authorized to vote on independence at that time, a committee of 5 was appointed to prepare a formal declaration for when independence, which was now seen as inevitable, was finally voted on. Thomas Jefferson, the youngest on the committee, was tasked with writing the draft of the document that was then fine-tuned with the help of the others, including Benjamin Franklin, who had spent many years in London as a colonial representative and had even traveled to Ireland and saw the intensely oppressive policies Britain was carrying out against the people there, believing that it was only a matter of time before something similar happened to America. Jefferson's statement, like Common Sense, was loaded with Enlightenment ideas like natural rights and the social contract. Delegates accepted Lee's declaration on July 2nd, 1776, and 2 days later, on July the 4th, the formal statement was approved and made public. Here is a link to a little bit longer of a video that talks a little bit about the background and the impact of the Declaration of Independence, as well as a reading of it starring Morgan Freeman as your narrator. I'll put the link in the description box so you can check it out, or you can type in the shortened link that I have at the bottom of the screen here if you wish to check it out. It's approximately 14 minutes long, but I'm not going to play it right now. Now, the signers of the Declaration of Independence knew that by adding their names to that document, they were committing an act of treason. Supposedly, Benjamin Franklin, as he stepped forward to sign the famous document, was noted as saying, "We must all hang together, for if we lose, we shall assuredly all hang separately." Treason was an offense punishable by death. and that's going to get us into a revolutionary war with Britain. But for the details, you're going to have to wait for your next topic video.